So when you see our cities, these ritual cities, please realize that the geometry that's been proven now to be involved in them, through that book and previously through the work of Jordan Maxwell and others, that these cities are designed specifically for reasons. And those monuments and obelisks that you see, they're all for reasons. To enhance grid energy, to be sacrificial sites. Lady Diana Spencer was killed not far from this Eiffel Tower, right? At the junction of 3 roads, at the 13th pillar, etc., etc., etc. 100 years, almost to the day when Jack the Ripper killed his first victim on the 31st of August. A virgin. Right? Lady Diana Spencer represents the virgin, right? In occult terms. The whores that Jack the Ripper killed represent in esoteric terms a willing victim or a sacrificial victim. The 31st of January is when the sign of the Virgin, the Virgo constellation, goes into the underworld. On that day. The Virgin constellation of Virgo descends into the underworld. They take out the Virgin then. I teach this extensively, all of these rituals and what they get up to. They're not going to use solar astrology, because then the average astrologer would get onto this. They use other kinds of astrology that are more esoteric. And I specialize in that and go into this whole ball game about how geometry and sacred geometry is used in the designs of cities, and how assassinations of John F. Kennedy and other groups, other people, are entirely based on this. It's something we're living in, and we might as well know about it. It's happening in our backyard, and how the American designs of cities are like a silicon chip. Now remember we talked about the ancient monuments, what they were built for? When these people went, when the serpent race went to different parts of the world, they had long lifespans, these sons of the serpent, but when they would actually die, their fellows, who remained, in order to commemorate the amazing life of this person, who's part alien, who'd come from another star system, who had enlightened the world, who brought civilization, healing, they could mend bones, they enlightened the Adamic race, who gave them freedom, who literally were our gods. When one of these people would die, they would erect, not over them, not as tombs, but they would build in sacred geometry with using harmonics, a edifice as a cenotaph, not a tomb, a cenotaph, there's a difference, right? To commemorate the fall of that being. And that's what those tombs are, and what happens when you're there. Right? When you go to those places and feel something, you're connecting with something. Remember all those ritual murders and deaths that happened in the Aztecs and the Druids, how suddenly all these wonderful cultures went to wreck and ruin and went into sacrifice and death and bloodshed? That was to change this when the other side came back in power again. But just know for now that these serpent people had a habit of doing that, and they would try to make the harmonics and the sacred geometry embody some aspect of that particular hero that died, some particular beloved, means that this person communicated. They try to do it in stone to remake that person live. Today that's what we do when we raise a gravestone to a dead loved one. We don't realize we're doing that now, but that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to encompass something of that person's life. Now the dark aliens do it too. When one of their beings died, they would bury this person and they would build something over it. And in fact, when one of them characters would die, wherever their bones were buried, that has become historically a place of unbelievable unrest in the world. And when I looked into this occult paradigm, I found out that 2 places where 2 of these dark masters are buried, one is Palestine and the other is Northern Ireland. So I've been working on, at some point getting some sort of exorcism done where we can remove these remains. It's not going to be easy because they're protected and the dark ones know where they are and worship those places as an altar. But yeah, the aura of the negativity that comes from these people's bodies, it causes conflict, which they suck off and suck off and suck off. Now, interesting too, because the White Brotherhood, where they're buried, is always feelings of great peace and protection, So when you remember, you're talking about earth changes, some people are fanatical about earth changes and where to go, if there's going to be earth changes. I personally don't buy into that, and I'm not of that disposition, but I have respect for those who do. Well, one of the things is these monuments, their very positioning is of interest because they have protection around them. One moment. Come to the final part here. So Washington, D.C. is one of the cities that is entirely based on this kind of geometry. And we need to realize it. And in Washington, D.C., you have very patently occult symbols. Here's George Washington in a strange pose, which actually represents the god of the Templars, Baphomet. There's nothing evil about this symbol in itself, I'm not saying that, but just the fact that it is occult, and one of your presidents happens to be stylized exactly as that, should tell us something. And then, of course, what we're more familiar with is that the symbols of the Nazis, for instance, are Druidic symbols. Right? Jordan Maxwell has gone into this about the symbols of the Malta cross and the oak leaves. Isn't it interesting that the Oval Office has an oak leaf motif? Hasn't the cavalry wore the oak acorns on their hats, your American cavalry? How the Russian on their lapels, the Russian generals wear the oak leaves, the French around their hats, so the gendarmes wear the oak leaves. I mean, wait a minute, half these people were meant to be enemies at different times, how come they're wearing all the same symbols? Yeah, they look enemies on paper, that's about it. The skull and bones, used by the pirates, used by the Yale University people, right? The swastika. We don't have time to go into all this now, obviously, but... and here is the symbol of your Smithsonian Institute, a black sun. And they've also been telling us, by the way, about the two ways that they control the world. The cross and the crown, which is the symbol of the Knights Templar, are the two means by which they've controlled the world. Religion and monarchy. Right? Two forms of mind control that have done the job. Again, I apologize. We have a lot to go into and we don't have the time. Yeah, I'd love it. Oh, here's an interesting one here. Here's the serpent itself, right? And look beside it is the swastika. Remember I made an anecdote earlier on about how the swastika was a serpent? This comes from the Picts of ancient Scotland, using the swastika, the Malta cross, and the serpents. You know why? Anunnaki, as I said, was a bad translation. The word Nazi, one of the 8 children of the mother goddess Ninharsag, right, who's Sumerian goddess of the Anunnaki, Nazi was her son, one of the 8 children. 8 children. See that? The children, one of the children of an Anunnaki member was called Nazi, or Nazi. Nazareth was the hometown of Jesus Christ, son of a virgin. Nazareth. Because Naza meant Nagar, it comes from Nagar, or the serpent. Priests. Now we have been told all along what's going on. When they're talking about nuclear war, atomic war, Cold War, and Star Wars, those very terms tell you that they're not dropping bombs on you from space. They're working inside. Nuclear and atomic imply something. Cold implies something. We're looking for reds under the beds and, atom bombs to drop from the sky, and all the time they're working on us inwardly, atomically, genetically. The whole thing's been a genetic war. Because remember, part of the journey to build the hardware is not just to get out of the planet. What also did they lose? Was the ability to do gene research. Does that ring any bells? What's been coming of vogue very recently? The very same thing. In the Bay Area, California, right here, most of the companies are not silicon-based. They are genetic and orientated. Many of you work there, you know this. 3/4 of them are gene-orientated. And then you have satellites, and then you have silicon. So they're doing it, and they've been telling us all along in the terminology. And the rituals of blood. I have really specialized in this a lot. It's a fascinating subject in itself. But please realize that the Holocaust, the word Holocaust in Yiddish actually means burned sacrifice? Right? John F. Kennedy, Guyana, Waco, Heaven's Gate, Columbine, Lady Diana Spencer, these are all specific rituals of blood. Yeah, same thing. Now this maniac, who's under mind control, yeah, he is operating from the Saturnian cult point of view. Remember how all the victims had Nike clothes on and Nike shoes? Nike, they're leaving you symbols. They play with us all the time. That was a ritual death done at a specific time. I mean, we know about the comet, but everyone was wondering, what about the comet? Nobody made the connection. It's like the comet represents a timing of something. Because timing and ritual death is very important. Everybody's wondering about the comet. Nobody was wondering about the timing. Here is the Nike tick, which actually represents the ring of Saturn. See that? That's the planet Saturn and its ring. All the victims wearing black attire. Black is the symbol of Saturn. Ask any astrologer, what is the symbol of the color of Capricorn and Saturn? It's black. The Nike logo is Saturn. All the victims were castrated. Read your mythology. What does Saturn do? He is the castrator of his father, right, the god. And the name Heaven's Gate. In astrology, there are two gates of the zodiac, Cancer and Capricorn. Capricorn was called the gate of passing. Cancer is the gate of the coming in of the soul. Gate of Capricorn is the passing out. Look at that. A ritual sacrifice called Heaven's Gate. The souls are literally left to go through the Heaven's Gate, out of the zodiac, out of time, out of the world. Yes. Very interesting. And that's only a small part of the symbolism that they surround on this part of these kinds of things. Here is an interesting symbol of a summit meeting. I think it's the G7. You see the table? What's in the middle of it? There's Clinton and Blair and Mitterrand, right? And there you have the circle. Did you know that this was the original symbol that was going to be put on the dollar bill? Amaraka already means the land of the serpents, but this was the symbol that was going to be put on your dollar bill. Look at the surrounding. It wasn't put on. It was a little obvious. Now, it happens to be a fact that all of the presidents that were ever elected, it's in my book there, have direct blood ties to the kings of England, to specific monarchs. Everybody familiar with that? If you're not, you better find out. That every president who's been elected, and the ones who have not been elected, who lost, have no blood ties, or lesser blood ties. Every president of America, see, this is meant to be a constitutional country? That's a laugh. But anyway, that's the point, is that they all have direct blood ties to British monarchs and to black nobility families. And the Sumerians state that the first human kings on earth were the offspring of custodial rulers who mated with the human women. Those matings entitled the half-human offspring to become the early monarchs of the earth. Get this book, Gods of Eden. I think Ted might be carrying it. The Sumerians state that the first human kings were the offspring of the monarchs of the earth, of the custodial rulers. He's telling you everything in that 5 lines, what we've just been talking about today. The laying out of the red carpet. I thought that was just for royal families. Clinton walks on one. Bush walks on one. Reagan walked on the red carpet, cutting the red tape, right? Getting through all the red. I'm in the red. You know when you're in the red? What is this bit about the red? And then the walking on the red carpet signifies the bloodline. That's why they roll a carpet out for the Queen of England, to say that she is of the royal bloodline. But your presidents are walking on it. That's symbolism for something. They're telling you we're the bloodline. We're not independently elected. We work for the same establishment. We walk on the red carpet. Thomas More, 15th century, the time we're talking about, everywhere. He was the man who was executed. He wrote the book Utopia. You know the book Utopia? You studied in school. He wrote this, and listen what he said. Everywhere do I perceive a certain conspiracy of rich men seeking their own advantage under the name and pretext of the Commonwealth. It's so old, it's new. Well, let's try. I'd love to get through this. To give you an idea of the kind of characters that have been ruling us. The 14th century Plantagenet Richard II, one of the most unpredictable of the English kings, after an unsuccessful peasants' revolt, this is familiar to anyone who studied British history, declared to his Saxon underlings, God omnipotent is mustering in his clouds on our behalf armies of pestilence, that they shall strike your children yet unborn. Look at that line. They will strike your children yet unborn and unbegot, that lift your vassal hands against my head and threat the glory of my precious crown. You wretches, detestable on land or sea, you will seek equality with lords and are unworthy to live. Give this message to your colleagues. Rustics you were, and rustics you are still. You will remain in bondage, not as before, but incomparably harsher. For as long as we live, we will strive to suppress you, and your misery will be an example for posterity. However, we will spare your lives if you remain faithful. So choose now which course you want to follow. These are just a small example of the people that have been ruling this world. And their cohorts, like this character, the philosopher Malthus, who advocated the eradication of the lower elements of society. He proposed wars, epidemics, and famines, to thin out the herd. He especially wanted to control the sexual reproduction of the underclasses. Darwin embraced these ideas. Herbert Spencer. While Darwin got the credit, the leading proponent of this chilling racial evolutionary theory was Herbert Spencer, whose ideas were based on race. Only one race is capable of ascending to the highest level of the evolutionary spiral, the others will be left behind. We all think he's talking about some Aryans or something like that. Because remember, to cover the racial, we're talking about the serpent race? To cover that up, that you won't actually find out what they're really talking about, they've done this number with the whole Aryan Anglo-Saxon, they're the superior race bit, which holds no water and is not true. Sure, they're wonderful people, very cultured and all of that, but so are a lot of others. That's another whole smoke screen to make sure you never find out what race they really mean, or they're really talking about.